The National Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, Paul Howes, is in the top end for talks over the shutdown of that alumina factory, and he joins us now from Darwin. Paul Howes, good morning and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Virginia.
You're there this morning in Darwin, not necessarily Gove. Why have you decided to go to that city and rather than where the alumina factory is?
Well, at Gove this morning we're having mass meetings with our members, and my senior officials are on site at Nhulunbuy for that meeting, which will start in about half an hour at the town centre. I'm meeting this morning with Adam Giles because yesterday we discovered that it's clear that the 2007 lease agreement that Rio Tinto signed with the Territory and with the traditional owners in northeastern Arnhem Land has a legal requirement for Rio Tinto to continue to operate the aluminium refinery there at Gove if they want to continue to mine bauxite. So clearly what Rio Tinto has done is breach the conditions of that 2011 lease, and what we're trying to establish at the moment is why the Northern Territory government hasn't taken legal action to enforce the terms of that 2011 legal document. It's concerning that it took a visit by us up here to Darwin to establish those facts. We notice in the Australian today, the Chief Minister of the Territory has said that he's written to Rio Tinto expressing his concerns about the terms of that 2011 lease not being met. When I meet with Adam Giles this morning, the question will be put on the table of why hasn't legal action commenced, why hasn't injunctions been put in place to stop the shutdown of the refinery, why is Rio Tinto allowed to breach the terms of their lease agreement with the traditional owners, and we're also going to be investigating our own legal options representing the workers there at Gove, what we can do to ensure that Rio Tinto complies with the law.
Well, I want to ask you about your legal options. Are you saying that you have sound and independent legal advice that says you could bring a successful case against Rio Tinto?
Well, what we've done is yesterday we got here, we established the terms of the 1968 lease, which is publicly available. We couldn't get a copy of the 2007 lease agreement, and then following meetings last night, we established that indeed the terms of the 2007 lease agreement are identical to the 68 lease agreement in terms of the requirement to refine. We've currently engaged counsel to assess our legal options. Then in the Australian this morning we read that the Chief Minister has confirmed that those lease conditions are there and that he has written to Rio about it. My meetings with the Chief Minister this morning will be trying to establish why hasn't the Territory government commenced proceedings.
Well, I guess my question goes to just the logic of whether any individual private company could be compelled to keep doing work that it says is financially not viable. So do I assume from this...
It's a lease agreement about mining, Virginia. So they want to continue to mine. That. Yeah, and to mine you have to refine. That is a pretty standard agreement. In fact, it exists in many other parts of the country. If you go to Whyalla, in South Australia, one still has the right to mine iron ore there. As part of that lease condition, they have to have a steel processing facility. It's looking at these operations in a holistic way, and if you have a lease condition that says if you want to mine, you have to refine, that has been the entire terms in which Nabalco, then Alcan, now Rio Tinto have operated at Gove. It was my understanding for a long time that's why the refinery continued to operate. When you package together the mining operations and the refinery operations, yes, it is profitable, and we want to know why the Territory government has allowed Rio to essentially walk away from that legal obligation.
No, I understand that, but just one last attempt here to try and get you to speak to this issue. Are you saying that you're realistically suggesting that you can compel an individual company to either keep refining or to give up its mining? Are you actually saying that you have legal advice suggesting you could make that happen?
Well, the question of whether we would have standing as a union is a question that we haven't established yet, but there is a legal document in place that says if you want to mine, you have to refine. It is not an uncommon set of terms and conditions, and yes, there have been cases run previously where that compulsion has been found to be upheld.
All right, well, let's talk about the state of the workers at the moment. I should imagine that's exercising your mind as well. What are you hoping? Let's say none of that works and Rio Tinto goes ahead with its shutdown. What are you hoping to secure for the workers?
Well, in our enterprise agreement with Rio Tinto, we have very strict conditions about relocation allowances. It's a remote community at Gove, and to move there and to leave is a very expensive exercise. Rio have confirmed with us that they will abide by those conditions. We've been talking with companies like Inpex, who are building a very large gas project here in Darwin, about the possibility of having some of those workers fly in and fly out from Gove to be deployed on the Ithacus project when it starts construction here shortly. I mean, our first objective is, as I've been saying, is to try and keep those jobs there in Gove. If we fail, we'll be working with the company and ensuring that as many of these workers can be redeployed as soon as possible. But to be honest, Virginia, you're talking about 1,100 jobs disappearing from a community of 4,000 people. It's kind of unimaginable to work out what exactly you can do to ease the pain. And the other point I should make is that when we've dealt with similar sized shutdowns in the past, such as, say, the Newcastle Steelworks in 1997, we've had lead times of up to 2 to 5 years to assess the social impact and to deal with that transition. The announcement here was made on Friday. We already have today and yesterday workers being spoken to by their supervisors about leaving. I've never seen a shutdown commence with such speed and urgency as this one here, which is why we've been very suspicious about whether there are legal obligations in place, and that's why Rio Tinto has been expediting the process of getting out of Gove's refinery as soon as possible.
Paul, our time is short, so I just want to move on to another subject that's got the attention of a lot of our viewers. Are you standing by your comments that Australia needs large-scale conglomerates running our farming sector, that the days of so-called ma and pa farming need to end?
Well, last year we had a contraction in the workforce, of the agricultural workforce, about 4.5%. We've long believed that Australian agriculture needs to be restructured. Now, if people are saying that there's nothing wrong with Australian agriculture, that we don't need to reform, that we don't need foreign investment, that we don't need to look at restructuring this sector, then fine. But our experience representing rural workers tells us differently. It tells us that this is a sector that is in desperate need of reform. Now, if people were offended by my comments, I'm sorry, it wasn't meant as an offence. If there are family-owned farms that are profitable and diverse, that's great. That's a wonderful thing. But let's also be honest and say there's a large part of this sector which has been struggling for decades, and restructure and reform is necessary. I'm a union leader. I'm used to people criticising my right to operate a large union and the need to restructure my organisation. It amuses me that when you start talking about the need for reform in another part of the economy, that people seem to think this is some type of personal insult. It's not. It's about it's a discussion that we need to have about the future of this sector.
Sure, Virginia. But it's possibly an inconsistency there as well. I mean, you're talking here with great concern about the loss of 1,100 jobs in Gove, but what about the loss of family businesses and family concerns and small-scale farmers and farming right across Australia? That doesn't seem to concern you as much.
No, in fact, I want to see a thriving, growing agribusiness sector. As I said, last year we had a contraction in the size of the agricultural workforce. Well, as I've said, I think we need to reform this sector, and yes, I represent workers, Virginia, and I represent workers in the agricultural sector, and I have personally been involved in many cases of underpayment and exploitation in the agricultural sector with large companies and with small companies. Now, I know many small farmers that do very well and have diversified and reformed their sector, but I also think this is a sector that's crying out for whole-scale reform, and there's nothing wrong with having a discussion about it. Why can't we have that type of debate without being held down and you know, having the coalition using that as an excuse to to run away from the hard questions that should be asked about their scandalous decision on GrainCorp?
It's not just the questions being asked by the coalition, though. Consumers here and overseas are demanding meat that's carefully reared, that actually has flavour, vegetables that are sustainably grown.
Yep.
Why would you start arguing for food grown by the agricultural machine?
Well, that's a silly statement to make, Virginia.
It's really not. It's really not. When you speak to.
Well, read my transcript from Sunday, Virginia, and actually look at what I said.
I have read your transcript.
I think. Well, then quote it out to me. Where did I say that food should be grown by the agricultural machine?
No, but that's what it comes down to when you're talking about large corporations and large sectors of the corporate community running our agriculture. That's what you get down to.
When there is different sectors in agribusiness that we have to look at, right? So, of course, you know, something like the King Island Dairy, that's a wonderful business that should continue to thrive and is a great export market for us across the globe. But when you look at some of the large-scale wheat and diversified crops that we have in other parts of the economy, when you look at some of the massive problems we have in sectors like rice, like cotton, with our irrigation systems, of course these are areas that are going to need large-scale investment. And unfortunately, small business cannot always attract the large-scale investment that is needed to reform that sector. Now, having a discussion and a debate about this, I think, is a positive thing for our community, and I think there's nothing wrong with us actually articulating the fact that this is a sector which is continuing to decline, which we are losing employment from, when we should be actually booming with the rise of Asia's middle class. We should be taking advantage of the Asian century, as everyone talks about, to become the food bowl for Asia by reforming this sector with the crucial reform that's needed in different parts.
Paul Howes, good to talk to you today. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Virginia.